Sorry I couldn't be here to rock out presentation with you. I know you guys are doing well, but I know it's now my time to give my private presentation. First off, I'll be starting with the spiritual requirements for being a pastor. First point I want to make that Gregory talks about and Prez talks about is God can ordain people who should be pastors or teachers for perfecting the church. What he's saying here is for the benefit of expanding, perfecting, and making the church as good as it can be. God is giving people the gifts and abilities to go out and be the best the church can be. The second point that is made in this chapter here that Gregory is talking about is the pastor's presence, his abilities should be shown through his preaching, but also his character. And in preparation, the spiritual requirements for this, they need to have that shown to the congregation of the people who they're leading. You can't just have somebody, who walks in and says, "I want to be the preacher today," who has maybe a bad moral view on things. So what he's saying is they need to show that in all aspects of their life. Next, Gregory starts talking about the commitment of the moral and spiritual formation that a pastor must have before coming into the role of leading a congregation of the people of the church. He's saying that they need to show it very explicitly to the congregation of the people, and if he doesn't, he needs more work on that. There's one other point that I thought it really intrigued me. It starts with Gregory talking about how a pastor must be cleansed. And he was saying if a pastor is not cleansed, he could lead followers down a wrong path or lead people in a way that is wrong. And as I was reading in this book, I was kind of puzzled by what he was saying there. Well, after a few times and getting to it, I realized that what he was saying here is you got to be pure and selfless with yourself, able to bring people to Christ, to God. Because if you yourself is not pure, how can you bring other people to know Christ and to live a life that's on fire for Christ? In the same way, pastors need to be the staple of honoring their spiritual commitments they've made with God in order for them to continue to prosper and expand their ministry in the church. If you have a pastor who preaches to you every week, but say he doesn't have a very vibrant spiritual life, how is he going to keep that church going? How is it going to be a prospering church, a church that people want to come to, who want to grow, worship in that church? And in order for that church to do that, that pastor needs to show that spiritual commitment, that ongoing fire for Christ. Lastly, a pastor must be able to draw deeply to God. He must be able to draw on theological thoughts, processes of what God is teaching us. And one quote that I was actually reading in the book, which I thought really kind of helped me grasp this, it basically starts off by saying, "No one is worthy of the mightiness of God and the sacrifice and the priesthood, who has not first presented himself to God, a living, holy sacrifice, and set forth the reasonable, well-pleasing service and sacrifice to God, the sacrifice, praise, and contrite spirit, which is only sacrifice required of us by the giver of all." And that just right there, I think, goes to show how much we need to draw on ourselves deeply with God, so that we can be the best serving people in our church, or in that, as a pastor, and saying, "Hey, I'm giving myself up for this." And Gregory goes on to say that in order to be a good pastor, in order to have this congregation move and do well, you need to be able to sacrifice things. You need to be able to go and basically give all you have for God, the giver of all, as he says. The next section is that Gregory talks about is call and obedience and the praise of place, spiritual autobiography, and preparation for ministry. He just talks about pretty much how he prepared himself for ministry and just a little bit of what he encountered. The first point he kind of raises is be faithful to God and to the ministry itself. He talks about how if you have one but not the other, it just doesn't work. You need to have both. And so in order to do that, make sure that your relationship with God is strong, and as well as the relationship with the people who you're leading in your ministry as well. He then goes on to say that you need to be obedient to God and call what he wants you to do. Don't fight against what he wants you to do. Go out and do his will, his ministry, his mission. He then goes on to say before he got into ministry, his fear was the failure of it. But as he got closer into ministry, he had the fear of failing God and being disobedient to him. So it kind of flipped. If his ministry failed, it didn't really hurt him as much as in maybe disregarding something that God had told him to do, and he didn't do it. And I think that poses a very good question. Not a good question, but a good, just keep rolling. I'll edit this up. It just poses a good thought process of, hey, if my ministry fails, it's still okay because God's still with me. He also then goes on to say, you need to have his self-knowledge. You need to know a lot about himself, and you shouldn't be afraid of telling stories or things about himself. Peter again asked that, so he said that you need to have good self-knowledge of who you are and what God is doing. And this kind of ties into the last point I made, but just know your personal story and what makes it special and unique to you. And don't be afraid to share it. He has a quote here that I thought was kind of goes along with the same premise. For God alone of all things cannot be escaped from or contended with. If he wills to seize and bring them under his hand, he outstrips the swift, he outwits the wise, and he overthrows. I think what he's saying there, or what I think he's saying there, is God is this big, sovereign, powerful person, and in ministry and the preparation for it, you need to be one with him. You can't hide anything. He sees everything that we do, and if you're trying to hold that little secret that you have, God knows about it. And you just be truthful to everyone in your ministry and your congregation. That's all I got. Flash it on, it's finding me. What was this? And that.